But we begin with the new details on the deadly shooting in Providence we first told you about last night. Police have by now identified the victim in the city's 5th homicide of this year. Eyewitness News cameras were rolling last night near the intersection of Elmwood Avenue and Warrington Street, where police say 22-year-old Francis Rodriguez from Providence was killed around 8 p.m. Eyewitness News reporter Jared Pliner is live at the Providence police station with new information from the mobile newsroom. Jared?
Todd, good evening. Yeah, 5 homicides now in the city of Providence, the capital city, and counting. We sought out the Providence Police's top man, Colonel Hugh Clements, for more today on the investigation. Another individual gunned down, this time in South Providence's Elmwood neighborhood. It was relatively early Friday night, just after 8, when shots broke the peace at Warrington Street and Elmwood Avenue. Police tell us local 22-year-old Francis Rodriguez was struck and killed while sitting in a car. It's unclear if Rodriguez was driving or a passenger. Eyewitness News caught up with Police Colonel Hugh Clements Saturday. He says his detectives are exploring leads.
It's still under investigation. Nobody is under arrest. We do have a suspect vehicle.
A woman who lives in the neighborhood who did not wish to be identified tells us she heard multiple gunshots ring out amid the confrontation. Eyewitness News wanted to know whether police are probing a potential gang connection.
At this point, we don't know if he's identified with any of the groups that we deal with on a regular basis.
Police have not put out a vehicle make or model. We'll, of course, bring you more information when we have it. Live with the Providence Mobile Newsroom tonight, I'm Jared Pliner, Eyewitness News.
Francis Rodriguez, age 22, lost to gun violence on May 2, 2014 in Providence, Rhode Island. Providence police responded to a fatal shooting in the area of Elmwood Ave and Warrington St. Friday evening. The victim was shot while driving where his vehicle eventually crashed. Police responded and rescue crews rushed him to Rhode Island Hospital where he was pronounced dead upon arrival as of Saturday. Providence police identified by police as Francis Rodriguez, 22, of Providence. Police continue to investigate the situation. NBC 10's Brian Crandall was live on the scene as the preliminary investigation was conducted.
Providence Mobile Newsroom in the capital city as we work the latest developments in a deadly shooting that we first told you about Friday night. It happened shortly after 8 o'clock that night. Police say the 22-year-old Francis Rodriguez was shot and killed while driving on Elmwood Avenue. Police are looking for a specific vehicle they believe was involved. At last check, they have not made any arrests.
Providence murder victim is seeking justice and calling for peace on the streets.
It's been a month now since Francis Rodriguez was shot and killed while sitting in a car near the intersection of Elmwood Avenue and Warrington Street. His killer is still at large tonight. Rodriguez's family held a vigil in his memory.
New at 10, Eyewitness News reporter Todd Wallace is live from the Providence Mobile Newsroom with more.
And Mike and Shannon, the family is still understandably grief-stricken over their loss. And while police continue to investigate who did it, family members tell me they also want to know why.
A mother's cry of anguish and pain can be felt in any language.
My mother said we'll be here on the 2nd of every month until something happens, until he's brought to justice.
22-year-old Francis Rodriguez was shot to death 1 month ago, May 2nd, here at the corner of Warrington Street and Elmwood Avenue in South Providence while sitting in a car. Lourdes Abar says when she lost her son, she lost part of her soul.
It's terrible. I've been having a lot of depression. It's been very terrible for me and for my other children too. We don't know what to do.
Rodriguez family and friends hold this candlelight vigil to honor his memory and to bring awareness to all of the violent crimes they say are destroying communities and families.
We claim justice for my son, and we claim justice for all the children who've been killing in Providence. That's going to have to be a stopping.
It's a void. I have 7 siblings, and you still say there's 7 siblings. You don't say, oh, I have 6 and 1 passed away. That's a void. It's a hole that can't be filled. It doesn't matter how many brothers and sisters I have. It is that we're all different. Francis came with his own uniqueness, and it's not there.
And once again, the family members say they will hold a vigil on the 2nd of every month, July 2nd, August 2nd, as long as it takes until the shooter is brought to justice. Reporting live with the Providence Mobile Newsroom, Todd Wallace, Eyewitness News.
Providence, RI. Police are seeking a 19-year-old Providence man in the murder of a young father in a drive-by shooting in the city's Elmwood neighborhood in May. Chiquiro Blandino is charged with the murder of Francis Rodriguez, in a secret indictment reported Wednesday by a Providence County grand jury. Police and the Attorney General's office say that Blandino was driving a car on May 2 when he shot into Rodriguez's car. Rodriguez was killed, but his passenger, Marvin Vasquez, survived. It was the second time Rodriguez was shot this year. He'd survived a shooting on New Year's Day, but the gunman wasn't caught. Providence, RI. Just 3.5 hours into the new year, 2 men were shot in downtown Providence, the city's first shooting of 2014. Jose Paulino, 25, who lives in Elmwood, and Francis Rodriguez, 22, of Washington Park, were at Washington and Green Streets when they were shot. A taxi driver and another friend brought the men to Rhode Island Hospital, where police were notified about the shooting. The men were hospitalized in critical condition, said Maj David Lapidon. Officers found 9 shell casings, shattered glass and blood at the scene, but the victims were uncooperative with police and didn't explain what happened, he said. One of Rodriguez's sisters said she didn't know Blandino or why he'd be accused of killing her 22-year-old brother. All of these kids are young, said Alicia Rodriguez. We have no idea why it happened. Rodriguez's family is organizing a candlelight vigil for him Wednesday night. He was the 4th child in a family of 8 children, who grew up in Washington Park. His parents and all but one of his siblings still live in Providence, she said. They have all suffered since Rodriguez's murder. Both of our parents take it one day at a time, Alicia Rodriguez said. It's been very difficult. You can't grasp it. Francis Rodriguez left his girlfriend of 6 years and their 3-year-old daughter, Hazelyn. Rodriguez watched their daughter while his girlfriend worked as a receptionist at a dental officer, his sister said. Since his death, the girlfriend has struggled to find childcare and is looking to return to school, now that she is the sole breadwinner, Alicia Rodriguez said. Detectives Lieutenant Michael Figueiredo and Angelo Avant both called her Wednesday morning with the news of the indictment. Now it's a matter of finding him, she said. We worry he might flee. The police released a mugshot of Blandino Wednesday afternoon and asked for the public's help in locating him. His last known address is 150 Stamford Avenue, in Elmwood. Along with the murder charge, Blandino is facing 2 counts of using a firearm in a violent crime, plus discharging a firearm from a vehicle, possession of a firearm without a license, and assault with a dangerous weapon. Meanwhile, at 8 p.m. on Wednesday, Rodriguez's family and friends will gather at the corner of Warrington Street and Elmwood Avenue for a candlelight vigil. This is where he was fatally shot. It's where they want to remind people of his life. August 2, 2014. A group of mourners attends a candlelight vigil on Saturday for Francis M. Rodriguez, 22, who was killed in his car in a drive-by shooting in Providence's Elmwood section on May 2. Rodriguez is survived by his girlfriend of 6 years and their 3-year-old daughter. Police are seeking Chiquiro Blandino, 19, on a murder charge. The Saturday evening vigil took place at the corner of Warrington Street and Elmwood Avenue.
It's a murder case that's gone unsolved. New tonight, months after the horrific crime, the victim's family has a new message. Eyewitness News reporter Marilyn Scherer is live in Providence from the mobile newsroom with the story.
The family of the victim is grieving their loss. They say memories of back-to-school shopping at this time last year remains fresh in their mind, and they're holding out hope that their son's killer will be found. Another month goes by, another vigil is held, and another day passes without the arrest of the man wanted for the shooting death of 22-year-old Francis Rodriguez of Providence. Since May 2nd, every month at 8 p.m. on the second day of the month, family and friends hold a vigil near the corner of Warrington Street and Elmwood Avenue and pray for justice. That's where Rodriguez was shot in the head while sitting in a car with a friend. Police are seeking 19-year-old Chiquiro Blandino for his murder. The victim's mother, Lourdes Diebar, wants to know why her son was killed.
I'd like to see him in court to ask him why he killed my son, why. And to ask him why.
Police are releasing few details, but we know a Providence County grand jury indicted Blandino on a murder charge. Family friend Anna Quezada says the violence is senseless and has to stop.
It's two families who die at the same time. The family who killed the kid and the family who lost that kid. And I think we need to do something. We need to stop this. And we all need to get together to stop the killing in Providence.
For DA Barr and her family, the pain and loss overshadows the anger. But holding the vigil means her son's murder will someday have greater meaning for others. And DA Barr says they'll continue holding that vigil on the second day of every month at 8 p.m. until her son's murder is solved. Reporting live with the Providence Mobile Newsroom, Marilyn Shera, Eyewitness News.
Providence, RI. A man who was sought for months in a drive-by murder of a young father turned himself in to face the charges on Wednesday. Chiquiro Blandino, 20, faced Superior Court Judge Robert D. Krause that afternoon, as his own family and the family of 22-year-old Francis Rodriguez sat in tense silence, watched by a dozen sheriffs in the courtroom. The Providence police had been seeking Blandino since shortly after Rodriguez and another man were shot in a car in the Elmwood section in May. The other man survived, but Rodriguez died, leaving behind a daughter, Hazelyn, who is now 4 years old. Rodriguez's family had held candlelight vigils at the spot where he was fatally shot, at Warrington Street and Elmwood Avenue, pressing publicly for justice. Rodriguez's parents became teary as they watched Blandino standing before the judge. Afterward, his sister Alicia Rodriguez said seeing Blandino was disgusting. Waiting for an arrest has been awful, she said. We just hope the trial goes by fast. Francis Rodriguez was the fourth child in a family of 8 children who grew up in the Washington Park neighborhood. Most of his family still lives in Providence and attended the arraignment on short notice. Since his death, we just keep going, said Alicia Rodriguez. Blandino's loved ones declined comment. His lawyer, Christopher Millay, entered not guilty pleas to the charges of murder, felony assault, drive-by shooting, and 3 other firearm charges. Providence Police Maj David Lapidin said Blandino had turned himself in, but there was little immediate information about where he'd been since police announced in July that they were looking for him. Blandino was indicted last summer, accused by the police and the Attorney General's office of shooting into Rodriguez's car on May 2. Rodriguez and another man had survived being shot in a car in downtown Providence on New Year's Day in 2014. No one was charged in that shooting. Someone also shot into his family's house on Cala Street in May 2011. No one was arrested. Blandino also survived a shooting in the Elmwood section in November 2013. Police charged 2 men in that crime.
Story that we first brought to you as breaking news last night at 10. Providence police tell us a man was shot in the 600 block of Elmwood Avenue around 8:30 last night. That victim was rushed to a Rhode Island hospital where police say he is listed in serious but stable condition, and there's no word yet on any possible.
2 men are charged with shooting another man in a parking lot in Elmwood Saturday night. A few minutes before 8:30 p.m., police officers found 19-year-old Chiquiro Blandino sprawled in front of a store at 609 Elmwood Ave, where an employee said he'd moved him after finding him wounded behind the building. Blandino had been shot in the back. As he was taken to Rhode Island Hospital, detectives searched the area and reported finding shell casings in the parking lot, a bullet hole in a wood fence, and bags of marijuana behind the store. Several men were seen fleeing in a distinctive blue minivan with chrome rims, according to a police report. Advertisement. Hours later, the minivan cruised by 2 officers working a detail post at Club Karma in downtown Providence, said Maj David Lapidin. The officers stopped the vehicle, finding 6 men were inside, but just 2 who were wanted in the shooting. Lapidin said. Jacob Dorber, 21, of 12 Harriet Street, and Arnold Angeles, 19, of 218 Power Street, were charged with felony assault, conspiracy, carrying a gun without a license, using a firearm to commit a violent crime, and firing in a compact area. Both have criminal records. Dorber, who Lapidin said is a gang member, was bailed out in September on charges of felony assault and intimidating a witness. He was charged in July 2011 with beating and stabbing a man on Elmwood Avenue, but those charges were dismissed 6 months later. Angeles was out on probation on a shoplifting charge. He was charged with carrying a knife at the Dominican Festival in 2012. Advertisement. Both men were arraigned at district court on Tuesday and ordered held on surety bail. Blandino's condition wasn't available Tuesday. What led to the shooting remains under investigation. Providence, RI. Gunfire sent Orlando Reyes crouching behind his car around dusk May 2, 2014, in the city's Elmwood neighborhood. He had just crossed Warrington Street with a toddler when he heard a rapid pop, pop, pop. Reyes quickly put the screaming child into the back seat and closed the door. He ducked for cover. When he looked up again, he saw a minivan drive by. He wrote down the license plate number, which he later gave to the police. Authorities say it was 21-year-old Chiquiro Blandino behind the wheel of that minivan. Just after he shot Francis Rodriguez with a stolen gun he traded for $80 in cash and $140 worth of marijuana, according to Assistant Attorney General Ronald Gendron. Rodriguez, 22, later died from a bullet that pierced the back of his neck and exited his left eye socket. Advertisement. Blandino's lawyer, Christopher T. Milia, in opening statements Thursday in Providence County Superior Court, didn't deny that Blandino shot Rodriguez. He said his client did it in self-defense after being stalked by and repeatedly shot at by members of the Congress Block, or C Block, gang. Milia said that Rodriguez's passenger, Marvin Vasquez, who fled the scene, had pointed a gun at him. He protected himself out of fear he was going to die, he said. Blandino was bullied and labeled a snitch because he went to the police and attorney general's office after being robbed in 2011, Milia said. In September 2013, he was shot 3 times, Milia said, as Blandino looked on in a courtroom filled with his supporters and those of Rodriguez. Every day he walked scared, Milia said. Reyes, who runs a daycare on Warrington Street with his wife, testified as the first witness in Blandino's trial in the Rodriguez homicide and the shooting at Vasquez. He told jurors that after the minivan passed he saw the green Subaru station wagon, the driver of which had just let him and the child cross in front of it, stopped in the middle of the street with the brakes lights on. It began to roll slowly forward as if the driver's foot was slipping off the brake before coming to a stop after hitting a garbage can, he said through a Spanish-language interpreter. Advertisement. My attention was on this car because something happened to the car, Reyes said. He had his son call 911. Reyes said he approached the car and saw a man, who authorities later identified as Rodriguez, slumped inside. He acknowledged, under questioning by Milia, that he had lost sight of the car at points as he crouched. I'm worried about the child's safety, my safety, he said. Gendron told jurors gathered in Judge Robert D. Krause's courtroom in opening statements that Providence detective Angelo Avant traced the license plate number to a minivan owned by Blandino's mother. Blandino's brother, Johan, would later lead investigators to the .40 caliber Smith & Wesson used in the shooting to avoid being sent back to jail for violating his probation terms on a firearms charge. Gendron said, the police retrieved the gun, which Blandino had asked his brother to hide, from under a bush on Netup Drive. Gendron said. Providence, R.I. Providence Detective Angelo Avant told jurors Monday that Francis Rodriguez was not a member of the C Block gang at the time of his shooting death May 2, 2014. Rodriguez had, at some point, been a member, but Avant said he learned from speaking with friends, family and C Block members themselves that was no longer the case. There was no evidence of gang retaliation, Avant said. Avant explained that an active gang member is someone who these kids would say rides and dies for their gang. Avant took the stand in the trial of 22-year-old Chiquiro Blandino, who prosecutors accuse of murdering Rodriguez in a drive-by shooting in the city's Elmwood neighborhood. Blandino's lawyer, Christopher Millet, is arguing the shooting was in self-defense, that Blandino had been targeted and shot at repeatedly by C Block members and had a gun pulled on him that night. Assistant Attorney General Ronald Gendron asked Avant if he had looked into a November 2013 incident in which Blandino was shot 3 times by men wearing hoodies that read I am geek, in honor of a murdered C Block member. Avant said he found no evidence that Rodriguez was involved in that shooting, nor any indication there was any connection between the November incident and Rodriguez's death. Providence, R.I. Francis Rodriguez survived a shooting on New Year's Day 2014 in downtown Providence, only to be fatally shot 5 months later at age 22 in the Elmwood neighborhood. Marvin Vasquez told jurors Monday that he was with Rodriguez, with whom he spent most days, at both shootings. Vasquez insisted that his friend was not a member of the Congress Block, or C Block, gang, though people sometimes thought he hung out with gang members, but he was never in a gang, Vasquez said. Vasquez took the stand in the trial of 22-year-old Chiquiro Blandino, whom prosecutors accuse of murdering Rodriguez and firing at Vasquez in a drive-by shooting on May 2, 2014. Blandino's lawyer, Christopher T. Milia, argued that the shooting was in self-defense, that Blandino had been targeted and shot repeatedly by C Block members and that Vasquez had pulled a gun on him that night. Vasquez, 22, an admitted former member of the Asian Boys gang, did not place Blandino at the shooting scene or anywhere in Rodriguez's life. Asked by Assistant Attorney General Ronald Gendron if he had ever seen Blandino or heard his name mentioned, Vasquez repeatedly said no. He denied that he and Rodriguez had exchanged words with anyone before the shooting, as Blandino contends. Instead, Vasquez described waking up around 7 a.m. at Rodriguez's house, smoking marijuana and then spending hours with Rodriguez driving around Providence smoking marijuana and drinking beer. Rodriguez had just finished a beer and was going over a speed bump on Warrington Street when rapid-fire gunshots began, Vasquez said. They both crouched for cover in Rodriguez's Subaru. I remember ducking, and when I looked up he was shot, Vasquez said. He checked on his friend, but he thought he was dead. Vasquez said he then walked away from the scene without calling for help because there was a warrant for his arrest and he didn't want to go back to prison. He had been on the run since September 2013 for violating his parole on firearms and weapons charges by testing positive for marijuana and cutting off his electronic monitoring bracelet. I thought I needed to get out of that situation. He said he denied seeing the shooter or that either he or Vasquez had a gun. Advertisement. And I didn't know who did it, so, of course, I was concerned. Vasquez said. You weren't concerned about those gunshots, were you? Milia said. I was. Vasquez responded. Scared enough so you got out and started walking. Milia said. I was. Vasquez said. Milia also questioned Vasquez about why he had been arrested for carrying a gun without a license in 2011, years after he said he was no longer affiliated with a gang. If you're not in a gang, why are you carrying a gun? Milia said. Because I was on the streets, Vasquez said.
We're checking for the latest developments today in the trial of a local man accused of killing another man in Providence. Chiquiro Blandino is charged with murder after Francis Rodriguez was killed in a drive-by shooting in May of 2014. According to the Providence Journal, a friend of the victim testified yesterday, denying he had any altercation with Blandino before the shooting. Blandino's lawyers insist that he and Rodriguez were in an argument and that Blandino shot him in self-defense.
Providence, R.I. A 23-year-old city man told jurors Wednesday that his brother had been labeled a snitch after he cooperated with police and prosecutors against C Block gang members who robbed him in 2011. 2 years later, a known C Block member shot his brother, Chiquiro Blandino, leaving him in critical condition and hospitalized for weeks. Johan Blandino said. What's a snitch? Defense lawyer Christopher Milia asked. Basically, what I'm doing right now on the stand, Johan Blandino said. And snitches get shot in Providence, Milia said. I guess, Johan Blandino said. Johan Blandino made a reluctant witness Wednesday in the trial of his brother, Chiquiro Blandino, 21. Prosecutors accused Chiquiro of murdering Francis Rodriguez, 22, in a drive-by shooting on May 2, 2014. Milia isn't denying it. Instead, he argues the shooting was in self-defense, that Blandino had been targeted by C Block members and that Rodriguez's passenger, Marvin Vasquez, had pulled a gun on him that night. Johan Blandino identified Rodriguez and Vasquez as members of the C Block gang, a claim that Vasquez denied in testimony Monday. He said his mother had received threats immediately after Rodriguez's death that he and his brother would be killed. Johan Blandino repeatedly said that he did not remember making statements to police implicating his brother in Rodriguez's death and leading investigators to the .40 caliber Smith & Wesson handgun that was used in the shooting. He couldn't recall telling Detective Angelo Avant that Chiquiro's passenger had told him about a confrontation with Rodriguez earlier in the day in which Rodriguez called Chiquiro a snitch. He didn't remember saying that his brother had been chased all day and went home to get the gun before encountering and shooting Rodriguez on Warrington Street. It's not my case. I remember my brother getting shot. I remember me getting shot, Johan Blandino said in response to questions from Assistant Attorney General Ronald Gendron. I don't remember the stuff you're trying to get me to remember, said Johan Blandino, who is currently in prison for possession of a gun without a license. Gendron asked him if he was denying that he told a grand jury under oath that it was his brother who told him to get rid of the dirty gun that had been used in the shooting. I'm not denying it. I don't remember, Johan Blandino said. Johan Blandino, who barely looked at his brother, acknowledged that the police suspected he had shot Rodriguez when they arrested him for driving on a suspended license the night of the shooting. Investigators took his hoodie and cell phone and tested his hands for gunshot residue. He admitted to That Gendron told him he would approach the parole board on his behalf if he cooperated with the prosecution, and that he faced being charged with perjury and have the remainder of a 10-year sentence on the firearms charge imposed if he did not. The state rested its case with Johan Blandino's testimony. His brother is expected to take the stand Thursday. Providence, RI. What one lawyer called self-defense, another called simple murder Thursday in Superior Court. This was not a self-defense case. This was murder. This was simply murder, Assistant Attorney General Ronald Gendron told jurors in closing arguments in the murder trial of Chiquiro Blandino. Prosecutors accused Blandino, 21, of murdering Francis Rodriguez, 22, and shooting Marvin Vasquez in a drive-by shooting May 2, 2014, in the city's Elmwood neighborhood. Blandino's lawyer, Christopher T. Milia, argued the shooting was in self-defense, that his client had been harassed and shot at by C-Block gang members who labeled him a snitch after he testified that one robbed him at gunpoint in 2011. Blandino said he started shooting after Vasquez pointed a gun at him. The reality in Providence is you get killed if you are labeled a snitch, Milia said. Blandino, of Providence, had been bullied for years and shot by a C-Block member 6 months before the deadly encounter, he said. Blandino made a crucial mistake at that point. He went and got a gun to protect himself, Milia said, adding, this was going to be a drive-by shooting the other way. Only Mr. Blandino reacted, but Gendron said there was no evidence Rodriguez, of Providence, was involved in the robbery of Blandino or his shooting, or that the two men even knew each other. He accused Blandino and his passenger that night, Nelson Pineda, of lying about Vasquez having a gun to orchestrate self-defense arguments. Name-calling doesn't allow a person to shoot someone, he said. This was retaliation. This was retribution. This is I've had enough of this crap, Gendron said, adding, he was waiting for Francis to pass by him. He leaned out the window and kept on shooting at him. That's not self-defense. Blandino, too, took the stand in his own defense, telling jurors Rodriguez made a gesture that he would slit his throat hours before the shooting. He showed me like he was going to kill me or something, as if I was a dead man, Blandino said. Blandino said Rodriguez had called him a snitch earlier that day and pursued his car down Elmwood Avenue and into Roger Williams Park. Following that pursuit, he retrieved a gun he was keeping as collateral for someone to whom he sold marijuana. He and Pineda had stopped in his mother's minivan to roll marijuana blunts on Warrington Street when Rodriguez's Subaru station wagon pulled alongside them window to window. Rodriguez leaned toward the steering wheel and Vasquez, of Providence, pointed the gun directly at him. Blandino said, I felt like the only option was to defend myself, he said. He ducked down and shot out the window, but didn't know until later if he had hit anyone. He fled to New York and Massachusetts for the next 10 months before turning himself in at Superior Court. Gendron questioned his account, hammering away at the details in his cross-examination. Why, if Blandino had been pursued and harassed for years, did he pick that day to get a gun? Gendron asked. It was because, Pineda said, I think he had a gun in his hand after the earlier encounter, Blandino said. And Gendron asked about Blandino's testimony that he planned to give the .40 caliber Smith & Wesson back because he felt no need to own a gun. No, I never felt the need to shoot anyone, Blandino said. At Gendron's urging, Blandino demonstrated how he reached the gun out the window to shoot. He said he couldn't recall whether he was still holding the blunt. Advertisement. If Blandino faced such a threat, wouldn't it have been safer to stay at home that day? Gendron asked. Blandino said he had to make deliveries for his mother's restaurant. Blandino denied shooting at Rodriguez's Subaru as he drove away. Gendron asked how bullet holes ended up in the bumper and tail light of Rodriguez's car. Blandino suggested that perhaps those holes had come from a previous shooting. Advertisement. Blandino faces 6 counts, including murder, drive-by shooting, assault with a dangerous weapon and 3 gun charges. The jury is expected to begin deliberating Friday in the case, which is being heard before Judge Robert D. Krause. Chiquiro Blandino faces 2 mandatory consecutive life sentences plus as many as 60 years in prison after a jury found him guilty Friday of murdering a 22-year-old city man in a drive-by shooting in May 2014 in the Elmwood neighborhood. A Superior Court jury of 6 men and 6 women deliberated for about 2 hours before convicting Blandino, 21. Of all 6 counts in the slaying of Francis Rodriguez and the shooting of Marvin Vasquez on Warrington Street. Those counts included murder, assault with a dangerous weapon, drive-by shooting and 3 firearms charges. The courtroom remained quiet as more than a dozen of Rodriguez's friends and family watched Judge Robert D. Krause poll the jury. Did they all agree with the verdict? Krause asked. They did, they said. Blandino of Providence, who showed little expression throughout the week-long trial, looked stunned as his mother clutched a rosary and wept in the front row. He gave his supporters a slight smile as deputy sheriffs led him from the courtroom in shackles and handcuffs. Advertisement. The verdict came as a small relief to the Rodriguez family, many of whom sat through most of the trial. Blandino's lawyer, Christopher T. Milia, had argued that Blandino shot Rodriguez in self-defense after Rodriguez had threatened and chased him that day and Rodriguez's passenger, Vasquez, pointed a gun at him. Blandino and his brother, Johan, cast Rodriguez and Vasquez as members of the Congress Block, or C Block, gang. It was Johan who led police to the gun. There's no closure, Rodriguez's older sister, Alicia, said in the Attorney General's office following the verdict. It helps to know he's not out there enjoying his life while my brother's dead. He wasn't a bad person, she said of her brother. It kills us to hear those things. Her brother had wrongly been labeled a gang member because of the friends he kept and where the family lived, she said. We lived in the south side of Providence. It doesn't make us all in gangs. Advertisement. Francis, she said, was the fourth of 8 kids who had a sarcastic wit that made others laugh. He was amazing, she said, adding of the verdict it does help that it didn't go wrong. Asked if Blandino would appeal, Milia said I will be speaking to my client about his future legal options and will make all decisions based on our conversations. I respect the verdict. However, Chiquero and I disagree with the final outcome. Blandino testified on his own behalf in putting up unusual arguments of self-defense. He told jurors that he had been labeled a snitch by the C Block gang after he testified against a member who robbed him at gunpoint in 2011. 2 years later, a C Block member shot him, leaving him in critical condition and hospitalized for weeks. He said, C Block members bullied, harassed and threatened him continuously ever since. He said that he instinctively drew a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson semi-automatic handgun and started firing after Vasquez pointed a gun directly at him as he and a friend stopped to smoke marijuana blunts. Advertisement. I felt like the only option was to defend myself, he said. He didn't know until later that he had hit Rodriguez. He then fled to New York and Massachusetts for the next 10 months before turning himself in at Superior Court. But Assistant Attorney General Ronald Gendron poked holes in the account, questioning how Rodriguez's Subaru station wagon had bullet holes in the bumper and tail light if Blandino hadn't leaned out the window and fired at the car as it drove away. Advertisement. Gendron wondered why Blandino's passenger, Nelson Pineda, would have told a grand jury that he was angry with Blandino for shooting Rodriguez instead of just fighting him if Vasquez had truly had a gun. He accused Blandino and Pineda of concocting testimony about Vasquez pointing a gun to build a self-defense case. This was not a self-defense case. This was murder. This was simply murder, Gendron told jurors in closing arguments. Advertisement. The Rodriguez family credited Gendron Friday for helping them achieve justice on behalf of Francis, who had survived a shooting just 5 months before his death. Providence detectives Angelo Avant and Kenneth Court led the investigation along with Detective Sergeant William Dwyer.
New at 5, a Providence man convicted of murder is going to prison for the rest of his life. The Attorney General's office tells us a judge sentenced 21-year-old Chiquero Blandino today to consecutive life sentences plus 20 years. A jury found Blandino guilty last fall of killing 22-year-old Francis Rodriguez in a drive-by shooting back in May of 2014. Blandino had testified that he acted in self-defense.
Providence. R.I. A Superior Court judge on Thursday sentenced a Johnston man to 2 consecutive life terms, plus 20 years, in prison for a drive-by shooting that killed a 22-year-old man in May 2014. Judge Robert D. Krause Thursday sentenced Chiquero Blandino, 21, in the slaying of Francis Rodriguez and the shooting of Marvin Vasquez on Warrington Street in the city's Elmwood neighborhood. A jury in October, after deliberating about 2 hours, convicted Blandino of all 6 counts he faced, including murder, assault with a dangerous weapon, drive-by shooting and 3 firearms charges. Advertisement. Krause Thursday gave Blandino life for Rodriguez's murder and a mandatory consecutive life term for discharging a firearm while committing a crime of violence that resulted in death. In addition, he received a consecutive 10-year sentence for assault with a dangerous weapon and another 10 years, non-parolable, for discharging a firearm while committing a crime of violence. Blandino, formerly of Providence, also got 10 years suspended for drive-by shooting and a concurrent suspended 10-year sentence for carrying a firearm without a license, according to the Attorney General's office.